What's going on, y'all? Welcome to a new tutorial video as part of the Draft League Academia series. This video is going to be about what to do or how to draft effectively one-pointers in Draft League. And what I mean by one-pointers is I mean the Pokemon that are tiered rather at the lowest of the low. They are at the lowest point value. You only have 1 point left. What should you do with that remaining 1 point to ensure that your draft is as scary and as intimidating and as threatening as possible? How do you not waste that 1 extra point on something that is going to be entirely irrelevant? I very often see teams that had really strong potential at the start of the draft end up being subpar to mediocre drafts because the end round picks they don't really have any sort of unity or conformity. A lot of the time teams will just have like 2 points left and throw it away on something completely random or unnecessary. So this video is going to be about how to effectively use those last remaining few points on something that is effective. And in this instance, I'm going to basically only be talking about 1-pointers. Some of the mons that I feature in this might be tiered as 2 points. I wouldn't imagine that they're tiered any bit higher than that, but generally speaking, I'm going to be talking about what you should be thinking about when you have this sort of last pick with like 1 point left. So I guess the first thing to think about is, before I go into actual team builders and things, is what not to do. I think a lot of people too often will just pick up a typing, and I'm guilty of this myself, will just say, oh, I don't have an ice type, so I'll just, let's go to a tier list here, and let's just go to 1 point, and let's find an ice type. Okay, I don't have an ice type, so let's, oh, I guess you can't see here, so we'll use this as reference, I guess this is really bad. What do I do? What if I zoom in really? There we go. Can you see this on the side here? Boom. Okay, look at this. We're gonna pretend like you can see this side here. So let's say someone's hypothetically like, oh, I don't have an ice type. Oh, I'll just pick up Delibird and Dugong. Why not? Typically not the greatest thing to do. You don't want to just see what types you don't have, or Glalie, for example. You don't want to just see what types you don't have and just pick up a mon of that type, because truthfully, if I have top tier mons like Necrozma and Tokoko, and I'm not going to be scared of a 1 point Glalie, or if you don't have a poison type, I'm not going to be scared of a Dustox or whatever. You want to find 1 point mons that are 1, threatening, and 2, force prep. When you have 1 point left, you have essentially, at the point where you have 1 or 2 points left, your other mons on your draft should be able to support each other. If they're not, then that's where you should start considering free agents. But if you're in a situation where you feel like you need to patch things up with a lot of low tier mons, you don't want to be doing that. That's going to be less effective than just making free agents later down the line, because you don't want to be relying on Mightyena as your dark type or Octillery as your bulky water. That's not something you want to do. You would rather free agent and work things out later. Instead, you want to figure out how can you pick a 1-pointer that threatens prep, and you can do this in 2 ways. One is that you can specifically look at a certain matchup that you have or that you might have and counter team it. And I'll showcase an example of what that looks like in a second. The second example is that you can just think about one of these 3 things, and that is trapping, webbing, and steals. So I'll go over what I think each of these 3 are and mean in a moment, but we're going to start with trappers. So what I think is a very effective use of a 1 point mon is to pick up some trapper of some kind, that being Arena Trap, Magnet Pull, Shadow Tag. I think these are 1 point mons that will scare your opponents in certain matchups. If you're facing a Skarmory or a Celesteela, they will inevitably be scared of Magnemite. If you're facing a Mega Alakazam, they're going to be very scared of Trapinch. And even if there's ways that those mons can beat those mons, like, say, Skarmory has to run Shed Shell, or Mega Zam has to run Protect to stop First Impression on Trapinch, that's still a really good use of your pick, because you're forcing your opponent's high-tier mons to run a certain item against a one-pointer, or run a certain move against a one-pointer. And at that point, that's the value your 1 point has gotten you. It has mitigated the threat level of some upper tier mons in specific matchups. Second thing is, a lot of the time, I don't think your 1 point picks have to be like type efficient or anything like that. Like I said, you're not going to be really able to cover weaknesses and resistances with frail 1 point mons. So even if you have a ground type, say you have Mega Steelix, or you have, I don't know why that was the first one that came to mind, say you have Lando, Trapinch is still valuable because its role isn't as a ground type, its role is to trap in First Impression. Even if you have an electric type, Magnemite is still valuable because its role is to trap. Even if you have a psychic type, why not? Still valuable because it is there to counter and Destiny Bond and do all that stuff. Even if you have a ground type, like I said, Diglett can be super useful and effective to threaten things like Zeraora. If you're Scarf Diglett, then that threatens a Zeraora, for example. So there's just things that you can, it's less about worrying about type matchups and synergy and things like that. Even if you don't think it works on your team very well, just the presence of it on your team, even if you don't bring it in the matchup that it's supposed to be existing in, like even if you don't bring Magnemite against your matchup where you might have to face a Celesteela, the fact that your opponent was still forced to think about and maybe bring Shed Shell or bring Wakan or something, or run extra speed or something, that's an effective use of a 1 point mon that something like, you know, Glalie or Beedrill won't be able to do, because those mons don't really force prep in any sort of way because they're not threatening. Niche things are threatening. So one of the niches is trapping. So I'm going to go back to what I said a little bit about counter teaming. So the doc that I was just looking at, that I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit, was a tournament that I participated in that I ended up winning in alongside a partner. And my team was this right here. So you should be able to see it on the side. Really solid team, in my opinion. One of my favorites I've used in a while. Rotom Fan is one of my staple low tiers. I really enjoyed the bulk I had between Ferrothorn, Jellicent, and Rotom Fan, Diancie, and offensive threats like Garchomp and Obstagoon. Very cool. I had fun with things like Mega Glalie as well. It wasn't one of my best drafts, but it was a cool draft. This was my group, right? This here was my division or my group or whatever. So the way the tournament worked is I knew I was going to play, Rob was my teammate, Rocky Rillo was my teammate, so I was going to play him, and I was going to play 3 of these 6 people. So I was going to play Napi, Nico, Reginex, Luke, Cam, Isaac. I was going to play 3 of those 6 people. So I immediately started thinking, which of these currently, and I started thinking about this basically when I had 1 point left and I already had drafted all of these mons. And I didn't feel like I needed any extra types. Even if I did feel like I needed extra types, I knew a 1 point mod wouldn't cover it. So I started thinking to myself, okay, what is my worst matchup right now? And I realized that my worst matchup was this game right here, Reginex. Because my water type was a ghost type, my bulky water is a ghost type, I struggled quite a bit with Weavile. And even things like Mew, I didn't necessarily appreciate because, you know, Mew could just run like Vacuum Wave for Obstagoon or something like that. Or just any fighting coverage. So I noticed that Weavile in particular was a huge threat to my team. Especially something like a Life Orb Weavile or a Banded Weavile or something like that. And I decided I would use my 1 point pick to counter team that particular matchup. I didn't know if I was going to have that matchup. I had about a 50% chance. But in the event that I had that matchup, it was going to pay off because it was either going to force Weavile to run Shed Shell, which would feel like a useless item for him, or he wouldn't run Shed Shell and I'd be able to beat the one thing that counter team, or that beats my team super effectively. You know, my fighting type's Blaziken. That's not going to do shit. So, generally speaking, Trapinch there to First Impression, out-prioritize Ice Shard was really, really nice to have. And I'm going to show you all the replay that made use of this here. It was a super hyper offensive game where I basically just like sacked my mons very quickly in order to, bring in things like RattataMeN and my breakers like Garchomp, etc. I was not very concerned about, taking mons early. I just wanted to, I went into, I started with Blaziken literally just to break the Vikavolt, and then I went into Glalie literally just to set up one spike, and then the rest of the goal was, do damage with Azelf, do damage with, Garchomp, etc. I end up sacking my Garchomp here, essentially, and of course it looks awful for me in this game at this point, but since he reveals Life Orb, the 1 point pick is paid off. Now I can trap this Weavile with First Impression, and as you can see here, I'm very excited. It's just a very, very effective use of a 1 point mon in this instance, and it was what allowed me and my teammate to be first seed going into playoffs and, winning this game in particular. So you never know what effect that a 1 point mon can have, but you need to be strategic about it. Some people frown upon counter teaming, but in a competitive environment, if you see an opponent and think your matchup is horrific against them, grab a 1 pointer that is going to beat them. And in my case, that was a Trapper. As you can see, Trapinch was extremely effective against Mew just as well. So very nice show off of Trapinch here, absolutely. And it is actually gaining a little bit of popularity, but generally speaking, there's a little bit of hacks in the end here, but it doesn't end up mattering because I think Azelf cleaned the game anyway, no matter what. But I think RattataMeN just wanted a little bit of the spotlight. But what I'm trying to say is you never know when your 1 point mon can effectively work out, and it could be the difference between a certain seed and playoffs, which can determine matchups, etc. So always think about what is your worst matchup and what 1 pointer can you make that essentially counter teams it. So that is Trapinch being shown off, and a little bit of hacks near the end here. Not that it super matters, because I always remember that Life Orb Azelf was going to clean this game. But either way, a very, very, very good investment of a 1 pointer. And additionally, it still forces some of my other opponents in my other games to at least think about Arena Trap. I believe that one of my opponents did run Shed Shell, I think, on their Registeel or on something like that in one of my other games. So just the presence of a mon, even if it's not brought to a game, can still be effective. It stopped the Registeel from running Leftovers and forced it to run Shed Shell, which means it didn't get recovery. So that's why I think trapping in particular is a really good use of a 1 point investment. That being said, counter teaming isn't limited to just trappers. It could be a certain mon, hypothetically. If we go back here and we look at the drafts, or the freaking, I don't even know, price list, there we go. If we come back here and, hypothetically, if you're searching through and you sort of think like, oh, okay, I have 2 points left and one of my opponents I'm really scared of, like, doesn't have any normal resist, so I'm going to draft like Raticate. Like, I guess that works. Like, I'm not saying like don't draft, other mons that aren't like Trappers or Webbers or some of the steals that I'm going to mention. It's just about being strategic and thinking about what is your hardest matchup and how do you counter back against that. Don't spend it on something that is you're trying to like build a core with, or that fills a typing hole. Fill it on something that has some sort of utility in a matchup, or will force your opponents to just prep for you in a certain way in general. Webbers are another way to use up a 1 point. If you don't feel like there's a certain matchup you're nervous about, this is probably the route I would go. Basically, the idea is these are either bulky mons in the form of Charjabug and Dottler that give you sticky webs if you don't already have them, Swadloon as well. Cutiefly and Swirlix are faster variants of this that are more like suicide webs. It's just one of those things that might force your opponent, if they're smart, to speed creep in a way that might preserve EVs, or might waste some of their EVs rather, because they have to take into account Sticky Web, or maybe they're more incentivized to bring Defog and it forces them to like waste a turn. There's teams that are genuinely webs weak and will have to take into account the fact that a cutie flyer Swirlix does exist. So I'm not going to show you an entire replay here, but I'm just going to show you an example of Swirlix being relatively effective here in this instance. Swirlix being down to 1% here, having none that's burden triggered. Now I can go for Sticky Web, and yeah, that's a whole thing. Or I guess he wasn't unburdened, or maybe he would. Maybe this Kadabra was Scarf. Who knows? But I do know that Swirlix can also be Endeavor, which is why it's a good shot for it as well. So, you know, all of a sudden, webs are something important for Seb to be concerned about in this game. So, and even if he has defog on some of his things, it's still something that put pressure on him. So, just in general, important to think about. Webs are a very nice possible option to think about when you have 1 point left in a draft league. Even if you already have a bug type, you know, even if you have like Mega Scissor or Volcarona or something else, like you're not worried about typings anymore. You're just worried about utility, finding roles, and forcing prep. Last thing I have is Steel. So these are mons that are 1 point, but I think that carry their own weight enough to be possible niches that you can use on a team. And these are also mons that, once again, while they're like more offensive and less niche than something like Arena Trap or Sticky Webs, they're still mons that I think you can draft even if you already have a normal type, or even if you already have a fire type or a water type or something like this. So I'm gonna go backwards and then forward this way, because I have two replays for Monferno and Porygon. So first is Emolga. It's something that's only gained traction a little bit, although it does get Energy Ball now, so it's a little bit more effective to hit ground types. The reason I think Emolga is a great 1 point mon is because there is a obviously pretty substantial amount of electric types this gen, between Tapu Koko and Zeraora and Regieleki now being a thing, not to mention random things like Raikou, etc. Electric types are definitively becoming more common, especially with the rising voltage being a bigger deal. Having some sort of electric community, especially maybe if your ground type isn't something amazing, like maybe you got a mid-tier ground type instead of a high-tier ground type, it can be effective to get Emolga to at least have a secondary electric community in the form of Motor Drive. Additionally, its speed allows it to be an effective toxic sub-Stallmon, and it can also do things like Baton Pass if it's allowed in your league. It can do stall breaking things like Encore, it can set up screens, Tailwind, etc. It's just a mon that forces prep against either Stallmons or against electric types. You know, hypothetically, if, say, your ground type is Crocodile, right? Or no. Say your ground type is Gastrodon. Let's say Gastrodon for the sake of argument. A Tapu Koko, for example, might want to bring Thunderbolt and Grass Knot against your team, and then it's done. It can run Calm Mind, it can run Roost, whatever. But if you add an Emolga into the equation, maybe it has some sort of force to run Dazzling Gleam or U-Turn or something, you know what I mean? So just one of those things that forces prep again. Palpitoad is a suggestion for teams that fear they are weak to Dracovish. This is something that does switch in very effectively to Dracovish and is probably the 1 pointer that is best at doing so. It also has things like Stealth Rocks, and that's basically it. But between now getting Power Whip and Endeavor, it has a little bit more effectiveness than it did in previous generations, but in reality is just for if you feel like you're really weak to Rain, or if you feel like you're really weak to Dracovish in particular. This is another thing you can pick up as a 1 pointer mon that handles Dracovish. Yeah, Monferno. So Monferno is something that I've seen as like 3 points. It's been a thing, but I've also seen it as 1 point. Sorry, there's hair getting in my face, which is hilarious. So Monferno is a mon that, generally speaking, has both an offensive and defensive utility of a role. So just generally speaking, offensively, it's very fantastic. It has priority, which if you feel like you have a team that lacks in priority, Monferno is a great shot for you, given it has both physical and special stab priority. It has great coverage. It has Stealth Rocks. It has Taunt. It has Slack Off. It can be run in a variety of ways. Now, the replay that I'm going to show, which I believe is this one, yep, is my friend RattataMeN, who is my teammate in this season of Owl, which was 2 seasons ago, not the most recent one I participated in. Picked up Monferno as his response to Kartana. He felt that Kartana was something that he struggled with, as well as Mega Houndoom. And this is against Shayquaza, who is pretty big on the Wi-Fi scene, pretty big channel, and is all around a hilarious and great guy. I'm going to be picking on him a little bit in this video unintentionally. Not picking on like literally, but the other replays against him as well. But this is an instance in which Monferno was effectively used to counter both stabs of Kartana and Houndoom, and used in a defensive way that just captured momentum. It's just something that doesn't necessarily have a niche, but ticks so many check marks that aren't typing related. For example, rocks, taunt, pivoting, priority, all of these things that, you know, all of those checkboxes are marked. So essentially it was effective in this instance, and you know, was able to beat something like Kartana and Houndoom. And it was one of those things. I'm pretty sure Rat saw Shay's team and said, wow, I have a really difficult time dealing with Kartana. I have a really difficult time dealing with Houndoom. Let's pick up Monferno. You know, he's the kind of person who scouts all of these teams, so he probably does it more than anyone else. So you'll see it come out in a bit. Here it is first. So like Kartana goes for sub, and then, you know, Vacuum Wave is there, and because, you know, it's so especially frail, it's threatened out by Monferno. And as you can see, it's used as a slow pivoter now, which then, you know, allows Hoopa to get a huge hit off, and all around it's just a mon that was able to effectively work for Rat. You can see how very little damage that did, and even as he tried to Z-move, it didn't end up killing the Monferno. So it was used as a very effective slow pivot in this instance, and Rat was able to come out with a win thanks to this. So a little bit of this replay to wrap up, but generally speaking, I'm pretty sure, yeah, Scolipede comes in and cleans the team. But yeah, that's an example of Monferno being something that isn't necessarily filling a typing hole. Like, I know for a fact that Rat had Toxicroak on his team. That was he already had a fighting type. I don't know if he had a fire type already. He probably did. But it wasn't there to be a fighting type. It was there to have rocks fill a role or counteract in a specific matchup, which is just something you need to be mindful of. Okay, last suggestion is something that I only got turned on to recently, is Porygon, and that is because of Teleport. The main thing that Porygon has going for it, one is a ghost immunity, which a lot of teams sometimes struggle with, which is kind of nice. But it can sort of effectively exist as a teleport mon to get, once again, slow momentum, but it can set up Trick Room. Trick Room teleport is something that can be used very effectively with some of your slow offensive mons, and having a 1-point Porygon, if you feel like there's mons on your team that would benefit from Trick Room, is a really strong and effective option to essentially give yourself instant momentum by Trick Room and then slow pivoting into your sweeper, and then it can be really effective. Additionally, having Eviolite and Recovery is really effective and really more bulky than you'd think, essentially. But in reality, what I think Porygon is best at is Trick Room Teleport. And this can be used in a high tier league. I'm going to show a replay against Shayquaza again, which is this time done by Checkmate. It's a very fast game in which Checkmate essentially realizes that Shay's team is very weak to Alolan Marowak. Nothing wants to take a Flare Blitz and a Poltergeist. So at the first opportunity that he gets, he goes into Porygon and gets a Trick Room off and is able to now slow pivot through Teleport into Alolan Marowak and do some pretty big damage and breaking power, I guess, to Shay's team. It only, worked in that small instance, but it was still something that, forced him to sack something, which is honestly better than most other one-pointers can do. So it's just something important to think about, and it ended up working out in this game. So I've seen other situations in which it's been good. I just wanted to show this one because this is a game that Ben actually won, but Ben being Checkmate. But he did bring Porygon quite a bit and used it for teleport. I also saw him bring like Curse, and all of them could have been extremely effective. And he used it very well. So something else that is absolutely worth considering. Another thing that's worth thinking about, that you could, you can't see, but well, whatever, is Reboot and Thwacky are things that sort of force prep Thwacky now, setting up grassy terrain. That could be something that scares a lot of grass types, and Reboot having Libero. Usually these mons are priced higher than 1 point now. They used to be priced as 1 point, but I'm pretty sure leagues are picking up to the fact that they're marginally better. But if they end up being 1 point, definitely other options to consider if you're feeling really ground weak. For example, I think Thwacky is a phenomenal pick to counteract against that ground weakness, or at least force ground types to think about the potential of something that would completely neuter them. Otherwise, other random suggestions would be just to really search Defog and Rapid Spin if you feel like you're low on them, and getting like low tier clears, but they're not going to be super effective. They're not going to be very great. You know, Fletchender's not going to do it. Corpscore is not going to do it. I would really only think about ones with like Prankster, but I can't even think about scenarios which you'd bring them. I know Volibee is something that's 1 point quite a bit. That's probably something that I would suggest, that maybe that's something if you feel like you're really ghost weak, or if you feel like maybe you're really weak to a certain mon that Volibee resists on an opponent's team. That could be something to pick up. Or once again, just bulk and slow momentum, as you've seen between Porygon and Monferno, has been really effective as well. But it's about roles, less about filling type holes. Hopefully this is helpful for you. The general rule is if you have a 1 point left, don't worry about filling cores. If you're worried about filling cores or your draft feels incomplete, worry that in your free agents later. Think about trappers, webbers, and steals. Yep, that's all, y'all. And I hope you enjoyed.